I still remember the exact moment those words hit me, sharp and humiliating, like a slap I never saw coming. "You'll sleep in the kitchen, B*TCH. My daughter-in-law spat at me, her face twisted with a kind of hatred I never imagined I'd see in my own home. And what hurt even more than her words was what came next. I turned slowly, my heart pounding, waiting for my son to say something, anything to defend me. But he didn't. He just stood there and nodded, silent, avoiding my eyes like a coward. In that moment, something inside me cracked. I lowered my gaze, swallowed my pride, and walked away without saying a word. But tell me honestly, if you were in my place, if your own child let someone talk to you like that, would you have stayed quiet, or would you have planned something they'd never forget? I'm a woman in my late 50s, a widow, and until a few years ago, I truly believed I had lived a decent, honorable life. I wasn't rich, I wasn't powerful, but I was proud of one thing above all else. I raised my son alone after his father died, and I raised him with love, sacrifice, and everything I had. My husband passed away suddenly when our son was just 10 years old. One day he was there, complaining about his tea being too sweet, and the next day I was standing in a hospital hallway, staring at a doctor who wouldn't meet my eyes. From that day on, my life became about survival and motherhood. I worked long hours, stitched clothes late into the night, skipped meals so my son could eat better, and told myself it was all worth it every time he smiled or hugged me before going to school. I never remarried. People asked why, hinted that I was still young enough, that I deserved companionship. But I didn't want another man raising my child or telling him what to do. I wanted to be enough. My son grew up into a quiet, obedient boy. He wasn't rebellious, never talked back, and I took pride in how respectful he was. Maybe, looking back now, that was the first mistake I made. I taught him to be obedient, but I didn't teach him how to be brave. I didn't teach him how to stand up for the people who loved him. When he got into university, I cried for days after he moved into the hostel. The house felt empty, too quiet. Still, I told myself this was life, that parents raise their children to leave one day. I supported him through his studies, sent him money even when I didn't have much, and prayed every night that he'd build a better life than the one I had. That's where she comes in. My daughter-in-law, let's call her Sana. He met her during his final year. When he first told me about her, his voice sounded different, lighter, like he was floating. I was happy for him, genuinely. I wanted him to have love, a partner, someone who would stand by him. The first time he brought her home, I went out of my way to make her comfortable. I cooked her favorite dishes, cleaned the house until it sparkled, and even wore my nicest clothes, hoping she'd see me as a warm, welcoming mother figure. She smiled, but her smile never reached her eyes. She looked around my modest home like she was inspecting something she'd never willingly choose. I noticed it, but I ignored the feeling in my stomach. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was just an overprotective mother afraid of losing her son. They got married within a year. The wedding wasn't extravagant. I paid for most of it myself, dipping into my savings, because her family insisted on certain things, and I didn't want my son to feel ashamed or embarrassed. On the wedding day, I watched my son smile at her like she was the center of his universe, and I told myself again that this was good, that this was what I had worked for all my life. After the wedding, they moved into my house. It was a small place, but it was mine, and I thought living together would help us bond, help me feel less alone. I was wrong. The change didn't happen overnight. At first, Sana was polite, distant but respectful. She'd call me Auntie, with a forced sweetness, help occasionally in the kitchen, and spend most of her time in the bedroom with my son. I tried not to interfere. I gave them privacy, adjusted my routines, and even stopped watching my favorite TV shows late at night because she complained about the noise. Slowly, though, her politeness began to fade. She started pointing out things she didn't like. The food was too oily. The house smelled old. My clothes were outdated. She'd make these comments casually, often in front of my son, laughing as if they were jokes. Each time I looked at him, waiting for him to say something, but he'd just smile awkwardly or pretend he didn't hear. I told myself to be patient. She was young, she was adjusting. Maybe marriage was stressful. I remembered my own early years, how overwhelmed I felt, and I tried to give her grace. But patience can only stretch so far before it snaps. Over time, she stopped helping altogether. I cooked, cleaned, washed their clothes, and still worked part-time to contribute to the household expenses. She, on the other hand, slept late, scrolled on her phone, and complained that the house wasn't modern enough. Whenever I tried to talk to my son privately, he'd brush it off. "Amy, you're overthinking," he'd say. "She doesn't mean it like that." The day she told me to sleep in the kitchen didn't come out of nowhere. It was the result of months of swallowed insults, silent tears, and me shrinking myself to keep the peace. That evening, relatives were coming over from her side of the family. Sana wanted the bedroom she shared with my son to look perfect, and apparently my presence in the house was stressful. For her, she cornered me in the hallway, her voice low but venomous. "You know, it would be better if you didn't use the guest room tonight," she said. I was confused. Where should I sleep then? I asked, genuinely thinking she was joking. That's when she snapped, her face hardening. "In the kitchen, you don't need a bed anyway, you're old." I felt my chest tighten, my ears rang. I looked at my son, who was standing right there. He saw everything, he heard every word, and still he said nothing. That nod of his, that small, pathetic nod, was louder than any scream. I didn't cry in front of them. I didn't argue. I simply turned away and did as I was told. That night, lying on a thin mat on the cold kitchen floor, staring at the ceiling, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't anger at first. It was clarity. I realized that in trying to be kind, in trying to keep my family together, I had taught them how to treat me. I had shown them that my dignity was optional. As I lay there, listening to their muffled laughter from the bedroom, memories flooded my mind. All the nights I stayed awake nursing my son when he was sick. All the times I defended him when others criticized him. All the sacrifices I made without complaint. And there I was, reduced to nothing in my own home. I asked myself over and over again, was this my fault? Did I raise him wrong? Or was this just the cruel reality of being a woman who gives too much and asks for too little? That night was only the beginning. I didn't know it then, but it was the first step toward a decision that would change everything. And before I tell you what that decision was, before I tell you how far I was pushed and what I eventually did, I want you to think about this carefully. If your own child chose silence over you, if the home you built with your blood and sweat became a place where you were treated like dirt, what would you do next? Because in the next part of my story, things didn't just get worse, they became unbearable. After that night in the kitchen, something inside me went quiet in a way that scared even me. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise, my body stiff from the hard floor, my back aching in places I didn't even know could hurt. For a few seconds, I didn't remember where I was, and then it all came crashing back at once. The cold tiles under my palm, the faint smell of last night's spices in the air, the low hum of the refrigerator beside me. I sat up slowly, careful not to make noise, because some old instinct in me still wanted to avoid conflict, still wanted to stay invisible. I remember thinking, almost bitterly, that invisibility had become my survival skill. I washed my face in the sink, looking at my reflection in the small mirror above it. My eyes looked older than I remembered, darker, like they'd seen too much in one lifetime. I whispered to myself, barely loud enough to hear, "Get through today." That had been my mantra for years. Just get through today. But that morning, it felt heavier than usual. I stepped quietly into the living room and saw my son and Sana already awake, sipping tea on the sofa like nothing had happened. She didn't look at me at all. He glanced up for a second, his eyes flickering with something I couldn't quite name. Maybe guilt, maybe discomfort, and then he looked away again. No apology came, no acknowledgement, not even an awkward silence. It was like my humiliation had been erased overnight, like it had never mattered. I went into the kitchen and started preparing breakfast, my hands moving automatically, years of habit guiding me. As I cooked, I could hear Sana laughing at something on her phone, her voice light and carefree. Each sound felt like a tiny cut. I served the food, placed it on the table, and stood there for a moment, unsure of where I belonged. Sana didn't invite me to sit. My son didn't either, so I took my plate back to the kitchen and ate standing up, leaning against the counter like a guest in my own home. That day, something else happened that sealed my understanding of my place in that house. Sana's mother called in the afternoon, and Sana put her on speaker without even asking. I wasn't trying to listen, but the walls were thin and Sana's voice carried. She complained openly, laughing as she spoke, about how difficult it was to live with an old-fashioned woman. How I didn't understand modern ways, how I was always in the way. Her mother chuckled and said something about how sons should prioritize their wives after marriage. My son was there too. I heard him murmur agreement, saying things like, "Yeah, Amy is sensitive, and she'll adjust." That word echoed in my head for hours. Adjust meant endure. Adjust meant accept humiliation quietly. Adjust meant disappear. By evening, my chest felt tight, not from sadness alone, but from a growing realization that this wasn't temporary. This wasn't a rough adjustment period. This was my new reality. I had become an inconvenience in the life I created. That night, I didn't wait to be told where to sleep. I laid my mat in the kitchen again, as if preemptively surrendering. Sana noticed and smirked, clearly pleased that she didn't even have to say anything this time. My son watched silently, his shoulders slumped, like he was trying to make himself smaller. I wanted to scream at him, to grab his face and ask him where the boy I raised had gone. But instead, I said nothing. Silence had become our shared language. Over the next few weeks, the disrespect escalated in small but deliberate ways. Sana began giving me chores like instructions, not requests. Wash these now. Make tea, it's too cold. Why is the floor still dirty? Each sentence was sharp, clipped, designed to remind me of my place. She started criticizing my cooking openly, sometimes pushing her plate away after a single bite and ordering food online instead, right in front of me. My son would eat quietly, avoiding eye contact, as if not choosing sides made him neutral, but silence is a choice. I knew that, deep down. I think he knew it too. I tried one last time to talk to him. One evening, when Sana had gone out with friends, I called him into my room. He sat on the edge of the bed like a nervous child. My heart pounded as I spoke, my voice trembling despite my efforts to keep it steady. I told him how hurt I was, how alone I felt, how sleeping in the kitchen had broken something inside me. I asked him directly, did I do something to deserve this? He sighed, rubbing his temples, and said words I'll never forget. Amy, you're making a big deal out of nothing. This is just how marriage is. Sana comes first now. Please don't make things difficult for me. Don't make things difficult for me. After everything I had done to make his life easier, those words felt like betrayal, layered on betrayal. I looked at him and realized that he wasn't confused. He wasn't torn. He had made his choice, and it wasn't me. When he left the room, I didn't cry immediately. I just sat there, staring at the wall, feeling strangely hollow. It was like the last thread tying me to hope had snapped. Around this time, my health began to suffer. The stress, the lack of proper sleep, the constant emotional strain took their toll. I started getting dizzy spells, headaches that wouldn't go away, and a pain in my chest that scared me. One afternoon, while sweeping the floor, my vision blurred, and I had to sit down quickly to avoid falling. Sana rolled her eyes and told me not to be dramatic. My son suggested I drink some water and rest, but he didn't insist on taking me to a doctor. In that moment, I realized something terrifying. If something happened to me in that house, it would be an inconvenience, not a tragedy. That night, lying on the kitchen floor again, I finally allowed myself to think thoughts I had been pushing away. What if I left? Where would I go? I had some savings, not much, but enough to survive for a while. The house was legally in my name. Everything in it, every brick, every piece of furniture was mine. I had never used that fact as leverage. I had believed family shouldn't work that way. But family, apparently, could humiliate you, silence you, erase you. The thought scared me, but it also sparked something unfamiliar, a sense of control I hadn't felt in a long time. Over the next few days, I began observing quietly. I watched how Sana treated me when my son wasn't around, how her voice changed, how she spoke to me like I was hired help. I noticed how my son only intervened when it affected his own comfort. I listened more and spoke less. I started keeping my documents together, my bank papers, the house deeds. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do yet, but I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't continue like this. If I did, whatever was left of me would disappear completely. One evening, Sana crossed a line that still makes my hands shake when I think about it. I had cooked dinner, exhausted but determined to do my duty, and as I placed the dishes on the table, she sniffed and said, "This smells awful. Honestly, I don't know how you survived cooking like this your whole life." She laughed, looking at my son for validation. He gave a weak smile. Something in me snapped, not outwardly, not in a way anyone could see, but deep inside. It was like a door closing. I realized then that no amount of patience or sacrifice would ever earn me respect in that house. Respect wasn't something they were willing to give. It was something I would have to reclaim. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I lay awake, staring into the darkness, replaying every insult, every dismissal, every moment of silence from my son. But instead of tears, my mind was filled with plans, quiet, careful plans. I thought about my rights, about my independence, about the life I had put on hold for decades. I thought about the strength it had taken to raise a child alone, to survive loss, to keep going when everything hurt. That strength hadn't disappeared. It had just been buried under years of self-sacrifice. By morning, I had made a decision. Not the final one, not yet, but the first real step. I was done being invisible. I was done sleeping on the kitchen floor of my own house. I was done begging silently for basic respect. In the next part of my story, I'll tell you what that first step was, how I began to take my power back, and how Sana and my son reacted when they realized I wasn't the weak, obedient woman they thought I was. And before you raid on, I want you to ask yourself again, honestly, if you were treated like this by the people you loved most, how long would you endure before you fought back? Those days after I made that quiet decision were strange. On the outside, everything looked normal. I still cooked, cleaned, and smiled politely when relatives came over. I laughed when Sana joked. I nodded when my son spoke. But inside, everything had changed. I began keeping careful records of expenses, conversations, and even small incidents of mistreatment. I started documenting everything, text messages she sent, times she humiliated me, moments when my son stood silent. I wanted proof, not for anyone else but for myself. Proof that I hadn't imagined the disrespect, that I wasn't overreacting, that the house I built with my own hands wasn't mine in practice, only in theory. I also began paying more attention to the law, to my rights as a homeowner and as a parent. I consulted quietly with a lawyer friend I had known years ago. I didn't tell my son or Sana about this, of course. They would have mocked me. But the more I learned, the more I realized that everything I owned was protected by law. I could take steps that wouldn't just embarrass them. They could change the entire dynamic of our relationship permanently. But I didn't want to act recklessly. I wanted every move to be calculated, to be precise. I didn't want anger to be my weapon. I wanted justice. While all this was happening, the small humiliations continued. One day, she came into the kitchen while I was washing dishes and flicked water onto my apron, laughing as if it was some kind of joke. "Careful, Amy," she said. "You might ruin the floor again." My son, once again, looked away. I felt that familiar anger bubbling up, but instead of shouting, I smiled faintly, as if nothing had happened. Inside, though, I was boiling. That night, I lay awake on the kitchen floor, replaying her words over and over, and I realized something important. Patience had limits, and mine had run out. Over the next few weeks, I started testing them, subtly. I would misplace small items, move things around, and watch how they reacted. Sana would immediately complain and blame me. My son would nod silently. I noticed patterns in their behavior, weaknesses in their arrogance, and the ways they underestimated me. They assumed that because I was quiet, obedient, and tired, I was powerless, and that assumption became my weapon. Then came a turning point that would forever change the course of our household. One afternoon, I overheard a conversation between Sana and her friends. She was boasting about how she controlled the household, how my son did exactly what she said, how I was just there to cook and clean. She laughed cruelly at the thought of me having any influence. That night, I called my lawyer friend again. I explained the situation carefully, detailing the psychological abuse, the humiliations, and my son's complicity. We started planning quietly. I didn't want confrontation yet. I wanted leverage. I wanted them to realize that I had the power to change everything, and they wouldn't see it coming. Before I acted, I needed to address my own fear. For years, I had been conditioned to stay silent, to endure, to prioritize my son's comfort over my own. But now I had clarity. I realized that if I didn't stand up for myself, no one would, not my son, not anyone. And so, I began preparing in every way I could. I cleaned meticulously, arranged important documents, even updated my personal savings accounts without them knowing. I started small, testing boundaries. I spoke back once when she criticized my cooking in front of guests, using a calm, firm tone that she hadn't heard from me in years. She froze, her smirk faltering, and my son just looked confused, like he didn't recognize the woman in front of him. It was during this period, right before I enacted the plan I had been building for months, that I wanted to engage with you, the viewers, directly, because this is where the story could have gone in so many directions. So that's the situation I was in. Months of humiliation, years of sacrifice ignored, a son who refused to defend me, and a daughter-in-law who believed she ruled the house. I had a choice: continue suffering quietly, leave entirely, or take action in a way that would force them to confront the consequences of their behavior. Before I tell you what happened next, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have stayed silent and endured the humiliation? Would you have left quietly, hoping for a fresh start elsewhere? Or would you have confronted them in a way that left no room for disrespect? Think carefully, because what I did next changed everything, and nothing would ever be the same in that house again. From that night onward, I moved like a shadow. I kept doing my duties, but I also kept gathering evidence, observing reactions, and preparing my strategy. I had to make sure that when I finally acted, there was no way they could dismiss me, no way they could twist the narrative. The house I built, the life I had sacrificed for, the respect I had earned through decades of hard work. They would have to acknowledge me whether they liked it or not. Every insult they had thrown my way had only made me stronger, more focused, more patient. And the more I watched them underestimate me, the more certain I became that when the time came, my actions would be absolute. Little did they know, their arrogance and cruelty were going to be their undoing. I had learned their routines, their habits, and most importantly, I had learned that my son's silence was weakness, not loyalty. With this knowledge, I was ready to set the stage for a confrontation that would leave them stunned. And in the next part, I'll reveal exactly how the climax unfolded. The moment when I reclaimed my dignity, faced the humiliation head on, and showed them that no one, not even my own child, could erase my worth. The revenge, when it came, was not fueled by rage alone. It was calculated, precise, and ultimately inevitable. The day everything changed began like any other, but the air in the house felt heavier, almost charged, as if it knew what was coming. I woke up early, before the sun, the kitchen floor still my bed, but my mind was no longer racing with fear or sorrow. Instead, it was calm, focused, and determined. Months of planning, of quiet observation, of collecting evidence and understanding their weaknesses, had led me to this moment. I had everything I needed to reclaim my dignity, and I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I started with small, deliberate actions that would set the tone for the day. I cooked their breakfast exactly as I always had, but with subtle changes, spices adjusted just enough to test their reactions. I placed the dishes on the table with precision, then stepped back and watched. Sana glanced at the food, wrinkled her nose, and smirked, preparing her usual jab, but I met her gaze calmly. This time, she hesitated. There was no fear, but there was caution in her smirk, and I could see that the first cracks were forming. My son, as usual, said nothing, but I could tell he sensed the shift too. Once breakfast was over, I moved quietly to the living room, where I had set up the small stack of evidence I had compiled over the past few months: bank statements, text messages, notes of her insults, and even recordings of conversations where she demeaned me. I arranged everything neatly, as if presenting a case to a court, which in a way it was. I wasn't just confronting them emotionally, I was confronting them with undeniable facts. When Sana finally noticed what I was doing, her reaction was immediate. She laughed at first, thinking I was playing some harmless game. "What are you doing, Amy? Cleaning?" she mocked. I didn't respond. I continued arranging the papers, each movement deliberate, calm, and confident. My son looked up from his phone, sensing something serious but unsure what it was. I held his gaze for the first time in months, and he flinched slightly, like a child caught in the wrong moment. Then I spoke slowly and clearly, each word measured. "You have humiliated me in my own home over and over again. You have made me feel invisible, unnecessary, and worthless, and you," I said, turning to my son, "have done nothing. You chose silence over your own mother, and now it's time for all of us to face the consequences of our actions." The room went still. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. I placed the stack of evidence on the coffee table and began going through it item by item. Each insult, each dismissal, each time I had been forced to sleep on the kitchen floor was documented. Sana's expression shifted from amusement to irritation, then confusion, and finally disbelief. She tried to interrupt, but I raised my hand. "No, you need to hear this all, from start to finish, because I am not leaving this house again quietly. I am taking back what is mine, my home, my dignity, and my voice." As I spoke, my son tried to intervene, stammering, "Amy, please, can we just..." I stopped him with a calm but firm voice. "No, you were silent when I needed you most. Now you will listen." His face paled, and for the first time, I saw the weight of guilt press down on him. He realized that years of inaction had brought us to this moment. Sana finally exploded, yelling, calling me crazy, accusing me of overreacting. But I was unshaken. I presented every piece of evidence, every recorded insult, every moment where she had demeaned me or disregarded my presence. I spoke of my sacrifices, the life I had built, and the respect I had earned, which they had tried to erase. With each fact, her voice grew smaller, her smirk faded, replaced with an expression I had waited years to see: fear. Not physical fear, but the fear of losing control, the realization that the woman they thought weak had been quietly preparing her revenge all along. And then I delivered the final blow, not physical, but undeniable. I handed my son a legal notice I had prepared with my lawyer, making it clear that the house, while shared with him and Sana, was legally under my name, and that continued disrespect or mistreatment could have serious consequences. His jaw went slack. Sana's face went pale. The power dynamic had shifted in a single afternoon, and they both knew it. For hours they argued, pleaded, and tried to negotiate, but I remained calm. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten. I simply stated the truth. The weight of their own arrogance and cruelty had trapped them. My son realized finally that his silence had been complicity, and he started apologizing, stumbling over words. Sana tried to maintain her composure, but I could see the fear in her eyes. She had underestimated me for years, and now she had no choice but to acknowledge me, not just as his mother, but as a person with rights, dignity, and power. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the house changed drastically. I no longer slept on the kitchen floor. I reclaimed my room, my space, and my place at the table. Sana became noticeably more cautious, her insults replaced with forced politeness, and my son, though embarrassed, began showing respect. The shift wasn't immediate perfection. There were still tensions, but the balance had changed. I was no longer invisible. I had proven, without a single act of violence or rage, that I could not be disrespected or erased. The aftermath was not just about reclaiming a room or asserting authority. It was about reclaiming myself. I had spent years giving everything to my son and expecting nothing in return. Now, I understood that self-respect and boundaries were as important as love and sacrifice. My son and daughter-in-law had learned a lesson that morning that words alone could not have taught, that underestimating a woman who has endured, who has sacrificed, and who has observed carefully is a dangerous mistake. And through all this, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: pride. Not pride in victory over them, but pride in myself for finally standing up, for finally refusing to let anyone take my worth for granted. I had been pushed to the edge, humiliated in silence, and ignored by the child I raised, but I had emerged stronger, smarter, and more resilient than ever. That day, I realized that no one, no spouse, no child, no relative has the right to make you feel small. And when they try, the only way to protect yourself is to rise, to reclaim, and to assert the truth with unwavering confidence. In the end, they learned what I had known all along. Respect cannot be demanded silently. It must be enforced through action, through courage, and through the refusal to accept anything less than you deserve. And in that house, finally, the balance had shifted. For the first time in years, I was no longer just a mother. I was a force to be reckoned with, and nothing could diminish that again. The revenge had not been about cruelty. It had been about justice, dignity, and reclaiming a life that had been quietly stolen. And once that balance was restored, a peace settled over me that I had not felt in decades, a quiet, deep satisfaction that came from knowing I had finally taken control of my own story. After the storm of confrontation settled, the house felt different, lighter, quieter, and, most importantly, mine again. I finally slept in my own bed, surrounded by the warmth I had earned through years of sacrifice and endurance. For the first time in months, I felt truly at home, not just physically, but emotionally. The tension that had been suffocating me for so long lifted, replaced with a sense of balance and restored dignity. My son was still adjusting, awkwardly navigating his role between his wife and me, but there was a new respect in his eyes. He no longer dismissed me or avoided defending me. He had seen the consequences of his silence, and it had changed him. Sana, on the other hand, was a different story. She no longer laughed at my presence or dismissed my contributions. There were no more casual insults or smirks aimed to belittle me. She treated me with cautious politeness, a clear reminder that underestimating me had been her biggest mistake. And I did not gloat, nor did I let anger dictate my actions. I had proven a point without losing control, without stooping to cruelty. That satisfaction, that quiet triumph, was far sweeter than any confrontation born of rage. I realized that reclaiming my dignity didn't just restore my place in the house. It restored my confidence, my self-respect, and my voice. This experience taught me something fundamental about life, family, and self-worth. I had given so much, tolerated so much, and stayed silent for too long, thinking that love and patience were enough. But love and patience are not excuses for allowing others to trample over you. Respect is earned, yes, but it is also a responsibility owed to yourself first. And sometimes, the only way to get people to see your worth is to stand firm, to assert your boundaries, and to refuse to be invisible any longer. So to anyone watching this, remember, your dignity is not optional. Your voice matters, and no one has the right to silence you or treat you like less than you are. If someone in your life disrespects you, take stock, plan carefully, and reclaim your power. You do not need to be cruel, but you must be firm. Because the most powerful victories are not loud, they are quiet, calculated, and undeniable. If you were on my side through this story, if you felt the anger, the humiliation, and ultimately the triumph I experienced, like this video to show your support. Subscribe for more stories like this, where courage, resilience, and personal justice take center stage. And share your final thoughts in the comments. What would you have done in my shoes? Could you have endured, or would you have acted sooner? I'll see you all in the next story, where real people's lives, choices, and consequences unfold, and where every tale is a reminder of the strength we carry within ourselves.